The Solomon Islands, a scattered chain of islands in the South Pacific. To many, they were little more than green dots in a vast blue ocean. But in the early 1940s, these islands became the center of a deadly struggle. For soldiers on the ground and sailors at sea, the fighting was merciless. But above the jungle canopy, in the wide skies, another battle was unfolding, a battle that would forever change the balance of the Pacific Air War. In 1942, Japanese pilots dominated the skies. Flying the legendary Mitsubishi Zero, they were unmatched in agility and confidence. For American and Allied pilots, every mission felt like a gamble with death. But then, something new arrived. A strange-looking twin-engine fighter with a silhouette that looked like nothing else in the world. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning. To Japanese pilots, it was shocking. To American pilots, it was salvation. To understand why the P-38 made such an impact, we need to step back. December 7, 1941, the attack on Pearl Harbor. In just 2 hours, Japanese aircraft crippled America's Pacific Fleet. It was a strike that stunned the world and announced Japan as a dominant power in the Pacific. In the months that followed, Japan's empire expanded rapidly. The Philippines, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies, Burma, and countless Pacific islands fell under the rising sun flag. The key to Japan's early success was not just strategy, but air power. The Japanese Navy Air Service, flying the Mitsubishi A6M0, had no equal. Light, agile, and with remarkable range, the Zero swept aside Allied fighters in battle after battle. American pilots flying older designs like the P-40 Warhawk or the F-4F Wildcat often found themselves hopelessly outmaneuvered. In a turning dogfight, a Zero was almost unbeatable. Japanese aviators, many of them veterans of years of war in China, were skilled, disciplined, and confident. They believed in their aircraft, and for good reason. In the first half of 1942, the skies of the Pacific belonged to Japan. To many American flyers, survival meant avoiding combat whenever possible, not seeking it. But war has a way of forcing innovation, and far away in California, a new kind of fighter was being prepared, one that would challenge Japan's supremacy in the air. By mid-1942, Japan's expansion seemed unstoppable, but in August, the United States struck back. U.S. Marines landed on the island of Guadalcanal in the Solomons. For months, brutal fighting raged across jungles, seas, and skies. Henderson Field, a rough airstrip carved out of the island, became the center of this struggle. Whoever controlled Henderson controlled the supply routes in the South Pacific. From Henderson, American pilots flew missions daily, intercepting Japanese bombers, dueling Zero escorts, and trying desperately to hold the line. But their aircraft were limited in range and performance. Japanese raids were constant, their pilots experienced, and attrition was high. Guadalcanal became a graveyard for aircraft and aviators on both sides. The Americans needed something new, something that could match the Zero's dominance, and better yet, surpass it. And then, it arrived. A strange machine with twin booms and twin engines. To some it looked ungainly, even alien. But soon, Japanese pilots would come to know its name, the P-38 Lightning, and they would never forget the first time they faced it in combat. The P-38 was unlike any fighter that came before it. Designed in the late 1930s by Lockheed's brilliant engineer Clarence Kelly Johnson, the Lightning broke every convention of the day. Most fighters had a single propeller engine. The P-38 had two powerful Allison V-1710 liquid-cooled engines, each driving a counter-rotating propeller. Together, they gave the Lightning speed, power, and resilience. Its design was radical. Twin booms extended back from each engine to the tail, joined by a horizontal stabilizer. In the middle sat a central nacelle, home to the cockpit and heavy armament. To anyone seeing it for the first time, the P-38 looked futuristic, even alien. To its pilots, it felt like a weapon forged for the challenges of the Pacific War. Unlike most American fighters of the time, the Lightning was armed to the teeth. A single 20-millimeter cannon sat beneath the cockpit nose, surrounded by 4.50 caliber machine guns. Unlike wing-mounted guns on many aircraft, all of the Lightning's weapons were concentrated in the nose. This meant incredible accuracy, no convergence issues, no wasted fire. When a P-38 fired, its bullets and shells tore into the target in a devastating, concentrated stream. But its most important advantage was not its guns. It was its range. In the vast Pacific, distances were measured in hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles. Short-legged fighters like the P-40 or the F-4F could not escort bombers far enough to strike deep into Japanese territory. The Lightning changed that. With drop tanks attached, it could fly more than 1,800 miles. For the Pacific theater, range was life, and the P-38 had it. Compared to the Mitsubishi Zero, the Lightning was heavier and less maneuverable at slow speeds, but it was faster, could climb higher, and could dive at speeds no Zero could follow. Its two engines meant it could take punishment and still bring its pilot home. To Japanese eyes, this was a machine from another world. By late 1942, the P-38 was ready for war. Small numbers began arriving in the Pacific, first to Australia, then to New Guinea, and finally to the Solomon Islands. American pilots were eager to see how this strange new fighter would fare against the Zero. Many were skeptical. Some had trained on earlier P-38 models that were plagued with mechanical issues, cockpit heating, engine reliability, compressibility, and high-speed dives. But in combat, the Lightning quickly proved itself. On December 27, 1942, the P-38 scored its first kills in the Solomons. Flying over New Guinea, a group of Lightnings intercepted Japanese bombers escorted by Zeros. In the swirling fight that followed, the American pilots discovered the Lightning's strengths. They didn't need to dogfight like the Japanese. Instead, they used speed and firepower, slashing attacks from above, followed by rapid dives away from danger. Hit-and-run tactics, energy fighting, the very style the Lightning was built for. The Japanese had never faced anything like it. At first, they mistook the P-38 for a twin-engine bomber. They assumed it would be slow, clumsy, and easy kill. Instead, it came at them like a predator, fast, heavily armed, and able to strike and vanish before they could react. To Japanese pilots used to fighting P-40 and Wildcats, the Lightning was a shock. Accounts from Japanese aviators described their surprise. One recalled seeing the strange twin-tailed fighter diving through a formation at terrifying speed, cannon fire shredding a bomber in seconds. Attempts to follow in a Zero were useless. The Lightning simply dove away, accelerating beyond anything the Japanese aircraft could manage. Even if damaged, it often escaped its two engines, giving it a chance to limp home when a single-engined Zero would have been lost. Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's most famous aces, would later write about the frustration of facing the P-38. He admitted that, while the Zero could outturn it, the Lightning's speed and firepower made it a dangerous opponent. Japanese tactics of luring Americans into turning fights no longer worked. The P-38 could choose when and where to fight. For Japanese pilots, it was deeply unsettling. For American flyers, the Lightning was liberating. Instead of feeling like prey, they now felt like hunters. Pilots were trained to avoid turning duels and instead use the boom and zoom style diving from high altitude, delivering a deadly burst of fire, then climbing away before the enemy could respond. In groups, P-38s could coordinate attacks that broke up Japanese formations and forced them on the defensive. This was the beginning of a shift in the air war. No longer would the Japanese dictate the terms of battle. With the P-38, American pilots gained the ability to strike hard and retreat safely. It was not just an aircraft, it was a statement. The era of Japanese air superiority was ending. The skies over the Solomons became the proving ground. Mission after mission, the Lightning carved its reputation. Japanese bombers fell in flames. Zeros tried to pursue, but failed. The twin-tailed fighter had arrived, and with it, a new chapter in the Pacific War. By late 1942, the battle for Guadalcanal had become a test of endurance. On land, U.S. Marines and Japanese soldiers fought bitterly in the jungles. At sea, naval battles raged, costing both sides ships and sailors. But in the air, the struggle was constant, daily, and unforgiving. Henderson Field, the rough airstrip carved out of the island's northern shore, was both lifeline and target. Whoever controlled Henderson controlled Guadalcanal. Japanese bombers, escorted by Zeros, attacked relentlessly. American Wildcats and P-40s scrambled to meet them, but the attrition was severe. Pilots flew multiple missions a day, often in battered aircraft patched with sheet metal and wire. Losses mounted, morale was strained, and then the P-38 Lightning entered the arena. The first Lightnings to arrive at Guadalcanal in late 1942 and early 1943 were greeted with curiosity by Marine and Army Air Force pilots. Some doubted whether the heavy twin-engine fighter could survive in the savage dogfights over the island. But soon, skepticism gave way to respect. The Lightning was not just surviving, it was excelling. Its long range allowed it to patrol farther than any other fighter. It could meet Japanese raids before they reached Henderson, giving defenders precious minutes of warning. And when combat came, the P-38's speed and firepower often decided the outcome. Dogfights over Guadalcanal followed a brutal rhythm. Zeros relied on their agility, turning tightly to outmaneuver opponents. But the Lightning changed the script. Instead of turning, it attacked in slashing dives. Pilots struck hard, then climbed away before the enemy could respond. For Japanese aviators used to dictating the flow of battle, the Lightning was maddening. Imagine a Zero pilot confident, skilled, his aircraft light and agile. He spots the strange twin-tailed enemy ahead. He banks, ready to turn inside it, to lure it into a classic dogfight. But before he can act, cannon shells tear past his cockpit. The Lightning flashes by, climbs away, and vanishes into the sun. The Zero's agility means nothing. The battle is already lost. By early 1943, the Solomons campaign had become a war of attrition. The Japanese were losing veteran pilots faster than they could be replaced. Every mission drained their strength. Every dogfight claimed irreplaceable experience. The P-38, with its range and resilience, made matters worse. It hunted Japanese bombers across vast stretches of ocean, striking far from Guadalcanal, forcing the enemy to fight on unfavorable terms. The losses were unsustainable. For Japan, the Solomons became a bleeding wound, one from which their air force would never fully recover. For American pilots, the effect was the opposite. Where once they had feared the Zero, now they respected but no longer dreaded it. The Lightning gave them confidence. Missions once thought suicidal long-range escorts, deep interdictions, bomber protection now became possible. For the first time in the Pacific, American air power was not merely reacting, it was seizing the initiative. Aces began to emerge. Pilots like Richard Bong, Tommy Lynch, and Thomas McGuire pushed the Lightning to its limits, developing tactics that would inspire generations. Their kills mounted, and with each victory, the legend of the P-38 grew. By mid-1943, the balance of power was shifting. The relentless pressure of American air power, spearheaded by the Lightning, was grinding down the Japanese. The long-range reach of the P-38 meant that Japanese bases once considered safe were suddenly vulnerable. Convoys were attacked, bombers intercepted, and supply lines severed. The tide was turning. The Solomons campaign, once a desperate struggle for survival, became a springboard for the Allied advance. With Henderson Field secured and the Japanese forced into retreat, the U.S. could now look north to Bougainville, Rabaul, and beyond. And always, the P-38 was there, flying high above the jungle and sea, its twin tails cutting across the sky like the signature of a new era. Guadalcanal had been a crucible. It tested men, machines, and strategies to their breaking point. And in that crucible, the Lightning proved itself beyond doubt. No longer an experimental design, no longer a curiosity, it was now a proven weapon feared by its enemies, loved by its pilots, and central to the Allied war effort in the Pacific. By 1943, the P-38 Lightning was no longer an untested experiment, it was the spearhead of American air power in the Pacific. With its long range, speed, and firepower, it became the perfect tool for the vast distances of the South Pacific campaign. And in the hands of determined young men, it became a legend. Richard Bong, Thomas McGuire, Tommy Lynch, Charles McDonald, these names would soon be etched into history. Flying their Lightnings, they developed tactics, refined strategies, and pushed the aircraft to its limits. They became aces, not by luck, but by mastering the unique strengths of the P-38. The secret of the Lightning's success lay not in dogfighting, but in energy combat. Boom and zoom tactics, high-speed diving attacks, concentrated bursts of cannon and machine gun fire, followed by steep climbs back to safety. It was a style of fighting perfectly suited to the P-38. Japanese pilots who tried to chase quickly discovered the futility. In level flight, the Lightning was faster. In a dive, it was untouchable. Its concentrated nose-mounted fire meant even a short burst could rip a Zero or Betty bomber apart in seconds. Time and again, Japanese formations were broken apart by Lightnings diving like hawks from the sun. The psychological effect was enormous. What once had been confident attacks by Japanese bombers now turned into desperate defensive struggles. Every mission carried the fear that the twin-tailed predator would appear from above. But the Lightning's most famous mission, the one that would echo around the world, came in April 1943. It was called Operation Vengeance. Its target, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the Imperial Japanese Navy, and the man who had planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. Through a stroke of intelligence brilliance, American cryptographers intercepted Japanese communications. Yamamoto was scheduled to fly from Rabaul to Bougainville on April 18th. The Americans saw an opportunity, a chance to eliminate the mastermind of Japan's naval strategy. The mission was audacious. Yamamoto's route would take him deep into Japanese-controlled territory, over 400 miles from the nearest Allied base. No ordinary fighter could reach him, but the P-38 Lightning could. With long-range drop tanks, it was the only aircraft capable of making the journey. On the morning of April 18th, 16 P-38 Lightnings took off from Guadalcanal. Flying low over the ocean to avoid detection, they pushed their aircraft to the limits of endurance. For nearly 2 hours, they flew in radio silence, hugging the waves, navigating with precision. At exactly the calculated moment, they climbed to intercept. And there he was, a formation of Japanese Betty bombers, escorted by Zeros. In one of those bombers sat Admiral Yamamoto. The Lightnings pounced. Captain Thomas Lanphier and Lieutenant Rex Barber dove into the formation. Cannons and machine guns roared. One bomber exploded, plunging into the jungle below. Yamamoto's aircraft was hit, its wing tearing apart. It spiraled down, crashing into the Bougainville forest. Japan's greatest admiral was dead. The mission was a stunning success. For America, it was justice for Pearl Harbor. For Japan, it was a devastating blow. Yamamoto had been more than a commander. He was a symbol of Japanese naval power, a strategist respected even by his enemies. His death shook morale, and while the war continued, the loss of his leadership was irreplaceable. And it was the P-38 that made it possible. No other aircraft could have flown the distance, intercepted with such precision, and escaped. Operation Vengeance cemented the Lightning's reputation as more than just a fighter. It was a strategic weapon. After Yamamoto's death, the Lightning continued its reign in the Solomons. Pilots like Richard Bong, who would become America's top ace with 40 confirmed victories, racked up kill after kill. Bong mastered the P-38's strengths, diving attacks, accurate gunnery, disciplined teamwork. Thomas McGuire, another Lightning ace, followed close behind with 38 victories. These young men became legends, symbols of American skill and determination. But their success was not just about individual heroics. The P-38 gave the U.S. Army Air Forces the ability to project power across the Pacific. It escorted bombers on long missions, swept enemy skies clean, and ensured that the Japanese could no longer operate freely. For every Lightning ace, there were countless bomber crews who owed their survival to the twin-tailed fighter. For Japanese pilots, the Lightning was both a puzzle and a nightmare. They had never faced such an aircraft before. Its twin engines made it resilient. Its speed made it untouchable in a dive. Its concentrated firepower meant that even a single mistake could be fatal. They learned to respect it, even fear it. Reports from Japanese units called it fast, powerful, and relentless. Some tried to develop tactics, head-on attacks, surprise ambushes, but none proved consistently effective. The Zero's days of dominance were ending. A new predator ruled the skies of the Solomons. From Guadalcanal to Bougainville, from Rabaul to the open seas, the Lightning had proven itself. It was no longer just an aircraft. It was a symbol of American resilience, of technological innovation, and of the turning tide in the Pacific War. And at its heart were the pilots, young men who took the P-38 into battle and came back as heroes. For the Japanese pilots who first faced the Lightning in the skies of the Solomons, the experience was sobering. They had once flown with near-total confidence, believing the Zero to be unbeatable in the hands of skilled men. But the P-38 challenged everything they knew about air combat. Their greatest strength agility in a turning dogfight was suddenly irrelevant. The twin-tailed fighter would not play their game. It would not turn and twist in prolonged duels. Instead, it struck like a hawk, diving in with terrifying speed, unleashing a storm of fire and climbing away before the Zero could respond. Japanese tactics, honed over years of combat in China and the early Pacific, no longer applied. For the first time, Japanese aviators felt outmatched. Some tried head-on attacks, hoping that concentrated fire might bring down the heavy American fighter. Others tried ambushes, climbing high above to dive on the Lightnings. But the reality was harsh. The Lightning's power, speed, and firepower made it a fearsome opponent in almost every scenario. Even damaged, its two engines often brought it home, while a wounded Zero was almost always lost. It was a bitter adjustment for Japanese flyers. The era of easy victories was over. From 1943 onward, their losses mounted, their veteran pilots dwindled, and their confidence began to erode. Both in Europe and the Pacific, the P-38 earned a chilling nickname. German pilots called it Der Gabelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil. In the Pacific, Japanese pilots also came to fear its distinctive silhouette. The sight of twin tails on the horizon was enough to send bomber crews into panic and fighter pilots into dread. To them, it was not just another enemy aircraft, it was a predator. The Lightning's contribution to the war effort went far beyond dogfights. Its range allowed it to escort bombers to targets once thought unreachable. It flew reconnaissance missions, carrying cameras instead of guns, mapping islands and enemy positions crucial for future invasions. It served as a fighter bomber, strafing ground targets, sinking ships, and harassing Japanese supply lines. It was, in many ways, the Swiss Army knife of American air power in the Pacific. When commanders needed reach, when they needed striking power far from base, they called on the P-38. And time and again, it delivered. By the end of 1943, the Japanese air forces in the Solomons were bleeding out. Their most experienced pilots had been killed in relentless battles. Their replacements were often young, undertrained, and flying into hopeless situations. Against Lightnings flown by increasingly skilled American aces, they stood little chance. The result was devastating attrition, from which Japan's air power would never recover. The Solomons campaign had cost Japan dearly. It was not just the loss of territory or bases. It was the loss of the very men who had carried Japan's air supremacy in the early war. Without them, and facing the relentless pressure of American industry and innovation, Japan's skies grew darker with every passing month. For America, the P-38 became a machine of legends. Richard Bong, the quiet, humble farm boy from Wisconsin, scored 40 victories in his Lightning, becoming America's top ace of the war. Thomas McGuire, equally daring, racked up 38 before his tragic death in 1945. Dozens of others became aces in the cockpit of the twin-tailed fighter, each story a testament to courage and skill. But for every ace, there were countless other pilots who fought and survived because of the Lightning. Bomber crews who made it home because the P-38s had driven off attackers, ground troops who lived another day because Lightnings strafed the enemy, and reconnaissance teams who planned invasions with the photographs taken by Lightning cameras. The aircraft's legacy was not just in kills, but in victories, big and small, that shaped the Pacific War. The Solomons campaign marked the true turning of the tide in the Pacific. Japan, once unstoppable, was now on the defensive. America, once desperate, was now advancing, and the P-38 Lightning was at the heart of that change. It embodied the shift from fragile defense to confident offense, from fear to dominance, from the early uncertainty of 1942 to the momentum of 1943 and beyond. The Japanese pilots who first looked up to see the strange twin-tailed fighter in their skies could not have known that they were witnessing the beginning of the end. But they felt it. In their shock, in their frustration, in their fear, they knew the era of Japanese supremacy was slipping away. The story of the P-38 Lightning in the Solomons is not just about machines. It is about young pilots on both sides, flying into deadly skies, testing their courage against one another. It is about innovation, the daring design of an aircraft that broke the rules and rewrote them in fire and steel. And it is about history, the moment when the balance of power shifted, when the hunter became the hunted, and when a new legend was born. The Japanese pilots were shocked by its speed, shocked by its firepower, shocked by the resilience of an aircraft that seemed untouchable. But for the Americans, the Lightning was more than shock. It was hope, it was survival, and ultimately, it was victory.